We have built bigger homes, faster lives, smarter technology, yet something essential is quietly disappearing. Strength was never found in the individual strand. It was always in the bond.
Look around and notice a modern epidemic of isolation. It feels personal, but it's actually the symptom of a very specific societal operating system. In the West, that system is built on the Cartesian ego. It's the assumption, captured perfectly by the phrase, "I think, therefore I am," that every human being is an autonomous, self-derived island looking out at a separate external world. By the 19th century, Western institutions used this lens to categorize the globe, breaking reality down into disconnected, atomized parts for analysis and control. This unquestioned assumption of a detached, sovereign I warped how Western academics and missionaries translated the ancient philosophies of the rest of the world. You see this damage in the African philosophy of Ubuntu. The universally popularized English translation is, "I am because we are." But look closely at that translation. It introduces a glaring linguistic contradiction. It places the independent, autonomous pronoun I at the absolute center of the concept. Early European translators lacked the cognitive framework for an interconnected reality. They unconsciously smuggled their Cartesian ego into the definition of a collective worldview. Forcing a sovereign I into Ubuntu breaks the internal logic of the philosophy. To understand what the concept actually means, we have to look past biological definitions and examine the strict grammar of existence. This diagram maps the morphological structure of the Ubuntu language family. Here, meaning is generated through a relational network, pairing a classification prefix with a root stem. The root stem to, or ntu in Guni languages, does not mean biological human. Across the noun classes, this stem acts as a fluid placeholder representing pure existence or beingness. Watch what happens when we attach the class 14 prefix, bo. We get boto, or Ubuntu. This specific combination designates the overarching abstract field of existence itself. Now, if we swap that prefix to the singular class 1, mo, we get moto, a person. The language defines a human not as an independent origin point, but merely as a singular localized terminal of that larger field. Even the Soto-Tswana pronoun for the self, na, doesn't operate in a vacuum. The grammar deploys it strictly as a coordinate marker on a grid to establish a localized presence, rather than an independent actor. In this linguistic framework, an individual is impossible without the primary relational field. You are a coordinate that cannot exist without the grid. This specific relational worldview isn't isolated to Southern Africa. Centuries before Ubuntu was colonized, ancient Hebrew cosmology was flattened by the exact same Western translation apparatus. Look at the foundational Hebrew word echad, seen here written in the text of a Torah scroll. Western individualist frameworks translated this strictly as the solitary, isolated number 1. But tracing the authentic semantic range of echad reveals it denotes a compound unity. It describes a singular system integrated from multiple interacting, interdependent parts. Similarly, Elohim, the supreme creative force in the text, is morphologically plural. It functions as a plural field consciousness marker, mirroring the abstract field of Botho. These linguistic parallels suggest a broader pattern. In both the Hebrew and Ubuntu traditions, a collective, field-based ontology was translated into the language of the isolated individual, flattening a unified system into a map of separate parts. So how do these ancient systems actually enforce this interconnected reality in daily life? We can see it in two operational phrases, the Hebrew kamocha and the Sotho-Tswana kamocha. Kamocha structurally positions the neighbor within the exact same ontological frame as the self. It treats the other not as an external object, but as a fellow manifestation of the same systemic unity. The Sotho-Tswana phrase kamoka operates with the same logic. It translates to by means of the whole, routing any individual action entirely through the totalizing mechanism of the unbroken collective. These phrases function as structural requirements. They demand that you measure your neighbor on the exact same scale as yourself, because both are terminals drawing from the same system. This brings a heavy weight to the Sotho-Tswana social critique. Ga se motho, he or she is not a human. This is a relational judgment, not a biological one. If an individual breaks their alignment with the collective network, they forfeit their standing as a valid terminal. Because personhood isn't something you are born with, it requires active, shared participation to maintain. It helps to think of this relational society like water. Whether it exists as vapor in the abstract field of Botho, liquid in the collective Batho, or solid ice in the individual Motho, the underlying substance remains identical and unbroken. Reclaiming these ancient linguistic blueprints shifts the baseline of how we live. We are not autonomous islands fighting for survival. We are localized expressions of an ocean we must sustain. We carry libraries in our pockets, cross oceans in hours, and engineer systems of staggering complexity. Yet, amid this machinery of progress, millions walk through their days gripped by an exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. We interact through screens and servers constantly, firing data back and forth across the globe. But beneath this digital surface, we are experiencing an epidemic of profound isolation. It is tempting to point at familiar targets. We blame divisive politics, our fragile economies, or algorithms designed to capture attention. Those are visible friction points, but addressing them doesn't touch the root. We are attempting to fix our social and emotional exhaustion through the same systems that keep us isolated, leaving the structural breakdown of human connection untouched. Beneath the concrete and the code, every society operates on an invisible framework. It is a shared story about the nature of humanity itself. That quiet narrative serves as the operating system for everything we build. It shapes how we structure our justice systems, how we design our economies, and how we measure a successful life. Every civilization must answer one definitive question: who am I? If a society answers that question incorrectly, the blueprint is flawed from the start. A mathematical error at the foundation eventually guarantees structural collapse, turning a simple misunderstanding of our nature into an emergency. For centuries, modern civilization has defined the human being through the Cartesian I. This framework declares that you are a sovereign, self-contained island. On the surface, this sounds liberating. It champions personal freedom, ambition, and the pride of being entirely self-made. But setting up the isolated ego as the primary unit of reality carries a psychological cost. Your neighbor ceases to be a brother and becomes an economic competitor, a rival to outmaneuver. We institutionalized an invisible warfare and labeled it progress. When you view yourself as completely separate, other people and the living earth become resources to be mined, manipulated, and discarded. The predictable result is a breakdown of empathy. We watch younger generations sink into severe anxiety and medicate the pain of their disconnection, refusing to admit that our social structure itself is making them sick. Isolation on this scale is a terminal condition. We cannot mend a fractured human spirit using the exact same vocabulary of separation that broke it in the first place. Long before modern psychology mapped the brain, many African societies organized life around a radically different baseline, a way of being that prioritizes the collective over the self. They captured this in a single concept, Ubuntu. It translates as "I am because we are." It describes a structural reality. Your existence is a direct product of the community surrounding you. Relationship is not an alliance we choose to make after we become individuals. The relationship is the mechanism that generates the individual. Think about the tools you use to understand yourself. You received your language from others. You absorbed your culture and your knowledge from others. Every thought you have is processed through a framework given to you by a community. You belong before you become. Under this framework, the hard boundary between the self and the other is exposed as an illusion. This ancient insight is now being documented by system science, ecology, and modern neuroscience, different disciplines all pointing to the exact same reality of mutual dependence. We can observe this clearly in ancient forests. To the naked eye, thousands of tree trunks stand as separate entities, but beneath the surface, an intricate subterranean network of fungal pathways physically links the forest into a single living system, sharing nutrients from older trees to younger ones. This geometric model illustrates a different map of humanity. Instead of a battleground of adversarial egos, we see a singular, integrated network of being. When you are wired into a shared grid, protecting the node next to you is the most logical method of self-preservation. Your neighbor is quite literally the identical measure of yourself. Once you recognize this architecture, the instinct for ruthless competition dissolves. The measure of a civilization shifts away from what a single person can accumulate and focuses on what we can become together. Adopting this collective baseline does not erase who you are. Instead, it provides a stable anchor for your unique identity. A single musical note has a distinct pitch, but it only achieves its full depth and meaning when it takes its precise place within a larger symphony. But you must understand that this shift in perspective will not be broadcast on television networks. It will not be sponsored by multinational corporations or sold to you by digital influencers. They monetize our loneliness. They profit by selling us products designed to patch the very alienation they help create. A true recovery cannot be handed down from the top of a corporate pyramid. It has to be built, guarded, and sustained from the ground up, through the quiet, consistent relational choices made by ordinary citizens. We have the capacity to step out of the rigid vocabulary of isolation and step back into the living current of the human family. A branch cannot survive separated from the tree. A single cell cannot live independent of the whole body. Despite the complex architecture of our modern illusions, we have never been separated from each other. The water was never separate from the wave. The wave merely forgot what it was. By correcting the story of our isolation, we reclaim the connections that have always sustained us.